Damage buckets. How do they work? What are they? What truly is a magnet? How do you get to the multiverse? Can I go to the nether realm? All those things will not be answered here today except for damage buckets. In this video, we're going to focus on a conversation about damage buckets. I'm going to break them down through each one of their individual buckets. We're going to talk about how you would pull the information out from the game to understand how those damage buckets work, because I think damage buckets have a little bit of a mistake behind them. What is multiplicative in the game? What is additive in the game? What is multiplicative and additive? So in this video today, we're going to go through all those individual aspects and break them all down. But if this is your first time on my channel, the way I like to do things here is by upfronting the knowledge within my videos so that you can decide to stick around if you so wish. So with that being said, as you can see before you, we have the website d4ut.net. And right here is an entire damage calculator. You can go ahead over to this website, enter in all the values that you want to see. You can just kind of hover over them and it'll tell you like, hey, this is how you find this information. And you just simply select your class and you go ahead and do it. And it breaks everything apart to each constituent part of all the damage buckets. So if you don't want to watch this video on how they actually work and all the mathematics behind it, please, by all means, go ahead and check this on out. You can enter in the damage values here to see what portions of your gear maybe need a little bit of an update as far as an affix or an aspect goes. Maybe you're hunting for a specific passive or a paragon point, whatever it is. In addition to that, you also have this handy document here. Snow Raven has put this together, one of the members of the Diablo community, from a lot of the testings from people such as Woody Joe. And this breaks out all of the damage buckets in a color coding as far as what each and every individual damage bucket looks like depending upon the class you're playing. So if you want just a, hey, you know what, I'm at work, I can't listen to your video, guy, here you go. You can click both of these links linked in the pinned comment as well as the description, and you can just go ahead and sift through them to better understand. But if you want an actual detailed breakthrough, that's what we're going to be going through here today. And if you are heading out, please don't forget to like, comment, and or subscribe. Each one of those things does help me out in an absolute huge way. I want to get you back and enjoying the game as fast as possible, but those things go a very, very long way for me. Also, you can jump ahead to any portion of the video that interests you the most using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. Don't forget also to check me out on Twitch, where I will be streaming Diablo 4 as well as Baldur's Gate 3 when that comes out next month. But let's get started here on damage buckets in Diablo 4. So loading into the game, let's talk about our tool tips and how we even are going to discover a lot of the information that we're going to be interacting with. So when I hover over any of my abilities, you can kind of just see, hey, it does this much damage, and here it deals additional damage, or it's a radius. Just some pretty bland blanket numbers that really kind of reduce a lot of complexity. So if you just want to play the game, you can just play like that. But we're going to press escape. I don't know what it's like on console. We're going to go to options. We're going to go to gameplay. And then I'm going to go to advanced tooltip information and click that on. Save those changes. We're going to come back here and take a look at corpse explosion. So now I'm going to see a damage range, and I'm going to see 70%. So what this tells me is that corpse explosion will be doing 70% of my weapon damage, which then gets fed through all of my damage buckets, which I'll show in an actual concrete example in a second here, but it's really important to look at that. What you'll also see is if you take a look at corpse explosion deals 8% damage, increased damage to enemies that are slowed, blah, 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 blah. You'll see a little X. That tells you it's a multiplicative value. So as we start to talk about additive and multiplicatives, the game will show you if it is additive or multiplicative. Let's take up another example. We're going to look at our sword here. This sword shows me that it does a set amount of damage, and it shows me that it does plus 34% to vulnerable damage. Well, if I go to materials and stats here, we're going to go to vulnerable damage. Now, extra damage granted against vulnerable enemies, it has a base value of 20%. So if you kind of think of this as your base value is 20%, think of an invisible 20 in front of that 34%, telling you that your new vulnerable damage bonus is 54.5. Your vulnerable damage base of 20 doesn't get increased by 34.5%. It gets a flat additive bonus of 34.5, thus showing an additional 50-some% into that. So that is how additive and multiplicative are going to work as you take a look at through some of these. And if you even take a look here, it says gain 10%. Additive, increased movement speed. If I look at the actual aspect here, blood surges, Nova echoes again after a short delay, dealing 64%. Multiplicative, there's that X, less damage. So you can kind of find these context clues and tips within the actual UI by kind of diving into them. But I wanted to really express this, so if you want to use any of the calculators I've already shown you, this is how you'd pull the information. And if you're taking a look at the future points of this video, it's where we will be getting a lot of this information, because then you're going to look at your materials and stats, and your core stats, your offensive and your defensive, for a lot of what we're going to be talking about here today. Because this information, if you hover over it, gives you more contextual details of where that stat pulls from. And these numbers aren't always right. So you want to make sure you're hovering over it to get the actual breakdown. Sometimes it'll say something like, hey, your actual value for this is that. Like armor, for example, I hover over it. Oh, it actually says reduces physical damage taken from enemies of equal level by 62%, because the armor number value is an abstract value that you probably don't understand. So make sure you're getting the actual information here by hovering over and understanding what the true value is and what have you. But I wanted to kind of at least give you an idea of where this information is within the game before we start plugging it into calculators. When we look at Excel, we can see the entire damage bucket equation kind of broken out. And you might be wondering to yourself, what the hell is a damage bucket? So that's really the point of this video, is explaining how these things all interact and how something that is additive is oftentimes much weaker than something that is solely multiplicative. Say, for example, vulnerable damage versus something like damage versus close. And I'm going to, again, break those out. So you can see all this kind of color-coded. And these things, again, I've distilled them down to a little bit simpler information, or overly generalized to, again, make it a little bit easier to understand. Because one thing to really take into consideration when we look at all this is that damage in this game is extremely contextual. It's going to depend upon, are you close? Are you healthy? Are you distant? Are you this or that or this? Depending upon the skill and anything that's in your additive damage bonus bucket. This guy over here. We'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to now drill down into each one of these buckets and talk about them as a whole. And then we're going to show you how that whole bucket, or how the whole equation kind of puts these buckets together. Using the power of a zoom, we've gone closer to take a look at weapon damage. So weapon damage is our first thing. And what you really want to think about is kind of that raw damage of your weapon when you take a look at it. Because the attack speed of your weapon doesn't affect the raw damage number. It affects the amount of DPS you can do, because now your skills and spells are being cast faster. So what we're going to do for this is just kind of look at a flat damage value of 1000 for an early, easy equation here. Ignore that right there. And that's what we'll be kind of doing everything off of. We're not going to look at attack speed, because again, that's going to look at damage per second. We're looking at a flat damage value here, but it gives you an idea of how weapon damage kind of interacts with this whole entire thing, and how you can get a consideration for which weapon's really going to help you out the most in your build. Next up is your skill damage percentage. And this is very easily acquired from the game itself. Like if I click back here into the game, we can see that this just simply says Corpse Explosion does 70% damage to surrounding enemies. It's whatever that value is. It is a static value that will be dependent upon ranks invested into a point or whatever. The game's just going to give you a number, and that's the number that's going into any portion of this calculator as you kind of play around with it. But one thing to take a look at going forward, starting with skill damage percentage, is that you should stop thinking of them as the whole percent of 125%, because I think it's where you're going to start to get hung up. It's where I personally got hung up. Instead, I want you to think of it as an actual integer of 1.25. That's incredibly important, because you're thinking now, everything from the weapon damage is being multiplied by a number. And it's hard to envision what being multiplied by 125% or 50%, because it's not the actual value we'll be looking at. We're looking at 1.5. So again, looking at, rather than 125%, we're looking at 1.25. That's why we have both those numbers right there. Now we have our main attribute. Now this is going to be different depending upon the class you're playing. So if you're, say, playing a barbarian, you'd be looking at strength in this situation. Whatever attribute tells you in the game increases your skill damage. Let's take a look at that right here. We're going to click over to the game. I'm going to hover over intelligence, increases skill damage by 60% because I've got 600 intelligence. I've rounded here, but That's the equation, because we're taking a look at your class's primary stat counts as a separate damage bucket, which is main attribute, multiplying your damage by your primary stat divided by 10. So 500 divided by 10 is 50, because we're just dropping a 0 off the end of it, making it so that we're doing 50% damage from main attribute. What did I say what we're doing with our equations? We're pretty much throwing a 1 in front of it, so we can see that's 150%. That is the easiest way to look at this, because we're basically taking that number, getting the 50% from the 10, and then we're making that into a 1.5, because that's how we'll be multiplying it into the equation. Now we've reached our first multiplicative bucket, and that is a damage bucket. It's all multiplicative, right? But it has additive values into it. Now what I mean by that is you're going to look at your doll and it's going to say crit damage bonus. Its base is 50%. So you'll also have, though, stuff that will say crit strike damage versus, things that are CC'd, or versus vulnerable, or crit strike damage with your core skills. Anything that has crit strike damage X goes into this bucket. So any kind of additional crit damage bonus would be added here. So let's just say that my character has an additional 25% crit strike bonus on top of their base of 50, which would give us 75%. Remember, we're doing that. 1.75 is what that multiplication is going to look like. And the biggest boy in the band is the vulnerable damage. It sits in its own bucket. It only gets increased on by things that say, hey, increases vulnerable damage, and it is just a raw increase in your damage. It's pretty powerful. It will probably get nerfed in the future. Who knows? But its base is 20. So I'm going to say we don't have any additional vulnerable damage. So it's just going to do 20%, which is 1.2. So your additive damage bonuses, or what I'm now going to call your junk bucket, is pretty much everything else in the game that says increases damage with a certain context attached to it. Let's jump back into the game real quick to take a look at that. So if I look at this and I look at damage versus crowd controlled versus slowed versus elites versus close versus distant, while healthy, while fortified, with core, from blood orbs. So all those damage values will come together additively. You'll add each one of these percentages up, and then it gets put into this equation right here. And it has a base of 0, right? Because if you don't have any affix that increases those bonuses, then you don't get the bonus. So let's just say then it's 250%, which equals 2.5. This is, again, an extremely contextual bucket, because even though all those things added together are 250%, I might not actually be pulling 250% value, because let's look back at the game. Damage versus elite. Well, you know what? Maybe I'm attacking a non-elite. Well, that's 40% off of that thing. So now it's 210. Or let's say I am attacking an elite, but it's not crowd controlled. Let's just round that up to a 100. That's 150% rather than the 250. So you really have to look at all of these contextual things, because damage versus crowd controlled, damage versus slowed, they always go together, because it's going to be if you're slowing something, it's crowd controlled, but not all crowd controlled things are slowed. So you have to take a look at this, right? This includes those affected by slow, immobilize, stun, knockback, knockdown, taunt, fear, tether, daze, chill, or freeze. So if I've frozen something, well, I definitely don't get my damage bonus versus slow, right? I just get that. So you look at how these kind of put themselves together, because if I'm close, well, then I'm not distant. And if I'm distant, well, then I'm not close. So that's why you have to get an idea of how these things each push into your build. And when your build has a certain style of doing damage, right? Like, I'm close all the time. There's no real reason I should have any damage versus distant, unless it's just I haven't rolled the affix off or what have you. I'd want to stack as much damage versus close, because this is a wasted stat for me. I'm not necessarily doing anything with it. But I do spend a ton of my time healthy and fortified and using my core skill, so all these kind of come into effect. Same thing with slowed and crowd controlled. I am slowing things down all the time with Decrepify, so I get this bonus, which also is crowd controlled. But you know what? Maybe I didn't Decrepify them and I only used corpse tendrils. That would just kick this one off and not that. So there's tons of different ways. And even then, corpse tendrils can slow things. So it is like mind numbing how this can all work itself out. But it's just my really long-winded way of telling you, keep in mind that you're not going to get always a 250% bonus because all of your additive junk stuff came together. It had to all come together in the right exact light to give you the full value of everything in that column. Lastly, we have the global modifier. Now, I am not actually going to add any of this into any of the equations we're talking about today because they will be 1000% contextual on you, your build, your Paragon points, and your aspects. That's the biggest thing. Their global modifier bucket, as it were, is pulled off of your aspects, your skill passives, and your glyph bonuses. What I mean by that is, going back into the game, going into abilities, let's assume I'm healthy and using a blood skill. 36%, see the little multiplication, is going to be thrown into this equation at the end to increase my damage. That is what I mean. Skill passives, here's another one. Oh no, it's a corpse explosion. Here's another one. Plague corpse explosion deals 8% increased damage to enemies that are blah, 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 blah. These damage bonuses can stack. So this can go all the way up to 24%. Yeah, I had to do that math in my head because I'm not smart. But it adds as that global modifier bucket that exists outside of that. So this stuff says corpse explosion does 8% increased damage to enemies that are slowed, stunned, or vulnerable. Well, we already know there's a vulnerable damage bucket. We already know that there's an additive damage bonus in the junk bucket. Nope, this is a passive in your skill tree. It's in that global modifier. It doesn't get factored in to those other buckets. So it's important to talk about it, but I don't want to go into it today because it's going to just be so build and character dependent. But that is how your global modifier works. But bringing this all together, taking 1000, multiplying it by 1.25, by 1.5, by 1.75, by 1.2, and 2.5 comes up with this number. You can see the equation up here in the top. It's kind of weird and convoluted because we had to convert certain things to certain things, but it is roughly what will be happening. So again, this is not representative of what you will be doing because of the context in which you'll be doing it, right? Are you distant? Are you close? Are they CC'd? Are they not? So on and so forth. Are your global modifiers active? What have you? But the important thing of this video and understanding the damage buckets is not to be able to look at your character and throw all those numbers into a calculator and go, why am I not getting 13,781 damage? No, nay, it is to understand how, if I were to change this number, so let's take a look at this at 13,000. I'll put this right here, 13,781. Even increase the size so you can see it if you're on mobile. That's fine, I guess maybe not. There you go. So if I were to take this vulnerable damage, let's just double this, put it to 40%. I now do 3,000 more damage. So it just kind of gives you an idea of how this thing really kind of comes together. And even if I put like, if we take crit damage bonus and let's just put this to like, I don't know, 125. There you go. Or let's use a different skill. Let's use that corpse explosion. Actually, rather than doing 125, it's doing 75% damage. Well, it changes the equation even further. So this gives you an idea of how these damage buckets work. If you're saying, okay, you know what? I always have that base of 20 on my vuln damage. Just simply doubling it, bringing it back up to that 40%, gives me an extra 2,000 damage. So you can really piece together individual affixes or individual emphases in your build, because maybe you're not even doing vulnerable damage because it's just not how your build's focused. My build personally doesn't 100% focus on vuln uptime. So I do a ton of overpower damage, which is a part of the equation that is like the most mysterious thing right now. We don't really understand where that fits into stuff. So I'm not even going to go into overpower, but you focus this however you see fit for your individual character. Let me give you now an example of what it looks like if I have all my actual characters' values in there. I've already put them in, so I'll show you where I got them. So we have weapon damage, 2032. Jump into my game, go to my character, go to materials and stats, weapon damage, 2032. Boom, there we go. We'll go back to our spreadsheet. Well, I have skill damage percentage. Well, I already know that my corpse explosion does 70%, so we've got that right here. Now remember, skill damage percentage is different than the rest of these percentages. Remember, we had up here 125, so it was increasing actually our damage by that 25%. Well, skill damage percentage is going to reduce its damage. It just basically looks at whatever that percentage is. So this is not going to go to 1.7. This will actually be 0.7. Remember, it's going to reduce damage just a little bit because it is a percentage of your damage, either buffing or decreasing it, depending on whatever that number is. Our main attribute is 603. We took a look at that earlier. We've seen that on our paper doll. 600. We rounded a little bit earlier, but it's right there. Now, crit damage bonus, we're going to find that also on our materials and stats, offensive. You'll see it right here. That has a base value of 102.9. Ours is 129.1 through whatever bonuses we've got. We have put that into our equation. Vulnerable damage also as well, just going to be found on the paper doll. I call it paper doll because I played Ultima Online. That's what it's called in Ultima Online. I know it's not actually the thing anymore, but I've stuck with it for the millions of years I played video games. So 73.3 damage is what our vuln damage is. That's right here. I just rounded it up to a flat 73. And now for our additive damage bonuses. Remember, these are contextual. And my total value here is 280, even though these all have very set situations and when they're going to kick off. So the damage that it's going to spit out is going to be increased quite a bit. But I just wanted to show you where I'm pulling that information from so that I can then, where is it? Then do this. So reset. So all this damage value added up together is 34,000. Of course, like I said, there's too much contextual jargon for additive damage bonuses. So let's just put that at 0. So I do about 9,000 damage with my corpse explosion if it crits and if it hits a vulnerable target. Again, important, right? It's got to do those things for it to get the damage. So if you put your values into a calculator and go, well, shit, why am I not doing 9,000 damage? Well, was the target vulnerable? Oh, it wasn't. Well, then you're not going to be doing this, right? That drops down to 0. Now I'm doing 5,200 damage. It's why vulnerable and crit bonus are so strong on their own individual buckets, like I've been saying so many times. It's why everyone keeps telling you on all of the publication websites or people's YouTube channels and stuff like that. It's because you can influence this total so much. So hopefully this gives you a better idea on how these damage buckets actually interact with you in the game. But there's one important thing too I want to show you outside of this that will be simply derived from the weapon you're using. Using Space Edge technology, we've gone ahead and enhanced once more. So let's take a look at our weapon damage. In fact, I'm going to turn this value to 100 for this example. What I'm going to talk about is our raw damage on our weapon versus DPS. There are very few instances where you care about your raw damage on your weapon. You care about your DPS because it's going to make such a huge impact on what you can do. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works. I think the only instance I can really think of off the top of my head where we care about that raw damage is like a Necromancer minion build, because your minions don't pull from your weapon damage as it equates across your attack speed and everything else. They only look at these values. The thing that says right there in parenthetical notations, the actual damage, raw damage of your weapon. That's what they care about, because that's where the minions pull their damage from. But let's just say we have 1,000 damage and our attack speed is just like a 1, right? Well, let's go with a faster weapon, and let's just simply, which would then increase our DPS. So we're looking at weapon damage, right? Think of that now as saying DPS. So let's put this to then 1,100. And now look at our damage right now. It says 16,537. Well, now it goes up to 18,191. That's almost a full 200 increase, right? So you can see right there, look at that, Space Age technology, Control Z, it's crazy, right? So you can see that this has a huge impact on the damage numbers that you're throwing out and doing. That's why they always tell you, every single thing that on the internet is telling you, find the thing with the highest DPS, because that DPS gets reflected in the total damage value you can do at such a huge margin, and it's just a small little increase, a small little bit that gets multiplied the entire way through, right? Because now we're not taking 1,000 times. We're taking 1,100 multiplied by all of these little bits and pieces across the board. Let's take a look at that here on my minion build, right? Or not my minion build, my other Necromancer, the Necromancer. We were doing 9,000 damage. Well, now we're doing 947. And we were able to just kind of push all these little numbers up just enough to kind of give us more damage. And I was looking at 70%, put it to 100, and there you go. We'll look at 2032 and 132. That damage value would be higher. I was looking at a 1.1, so it would actually probably be 2232, something like that, right? To 2032. So about 2,000 more damage. But again, you can see that this is a huge increase in the amount of potential damage that your character can do based off of the DPS of the weapon you're looking at. So make sure you're getting that massive total damage value increase from maximizing your DPS on your weapon. So with that, it brings our video here to a close. So hopefully you have a better understanding of how all these damage buckets interact. I know this can be kind of confusing, and hopefully all the tools I've showed you and all of the individual info dumps, they help kind of put it all into context. And me using my really rickety ass Excel spreadsheet gives you an idea of the interaction between these buckets and how a little bit of DPS goes a long way, or how increasing a single damage bucket like vulnerable damage can send your damage through the roof because it is such a huge singular bucket, or how, you know what, additive damage bonuses are so contextual and there's such a small little bump in this number that it really doesn't have the massive impact of just simply focusing on crit damage or whatever it is. And if you have any questions about this, or there's something you're still not getting, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. More than happy to help you out. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.